Hello, my strong and fearless friends. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Like you're the background character in everyone else's story? Today, I want to share something powerful with you, the journey of a woman who spent decades fading into the wallpaper of her family's lives, until one day, her heart literally began to fail. But sometimes, our darkest moments become doorways to our greatest transformations. This is the story of Margaret Wilson, a 66-year-old grandmother who discovered that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, your passion, and your rightful place in the spotlight of your own life. So settle in, because this story might just change the way you see yourself and the choices still waiting ahead of you. Remember, the most beautiful second acts often begin when we finally find the courage to put ourselves first. But before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Let's connect in the comments below. The medical report had been sitting on the coffee table for 3 days now. Margaret Wilson stared at the manila folder from her armchair, the afternoon light catching the slight tremble in her hands. No one had asked about it. Not once. Her husband Thomas walked past it multiple times a day, reaching for the remote or his reading glasses, but never once acknowledging the report that contained news of her failing heart. "Mom, did you wash my blue dress shirt? I need it for tomorrow's presentation." Jason's voice boomed from the hallway as he rifled through the freshly folded laundry she'd placed on the dining table. "It's on the hanger in the laundry room," Margaret replied softly, her eyes still fixed on the folder. "I ironed it this morning." Jason rushed past her, phone pressed to his ear, deep in conversation about some business deal. He didn't notice her pale complexion or the way she pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm the erratic beating beneath. Kitchen timer rang, pulling Margaret reluctantly from her chair. Time to start dinner. Thomas would be home from his golf game soon, and the grandkids were coming over. Everyone expected her to have everything ready, they always did. As she chopped vegetables for the salad, memories of her doctor's appointment flooded back. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm afraid your condition has worsened. The valve isn't functioning properly, and we need to consider surgical options soon." The doctor's words had landed like stones, heavy and cold. She'd nodded, asked practical questions, scheduled follow-up appointments, all while a voice inside screamed that her life was crumbling. The front door slammed and Thomas's voice called out, "Margaret, is dinner almost ready? I brought Frank back with me." Another place setting. Another person to feed. Margaret closed her eyes briefly before responding, "Of course, dear. I'll set another place." That evening, as everyone gathered around the table, Margaret watched them from a strange distance. Her daughter Rebecca was complaining about her boss while simultaneously texting under the table. Thomas and Frank were debating politics, not bothering to include her in the conversation. Her grandchildren, Alex and Lily, were absorbed in their tablets, barely touching the meal she'd spent hours preparing. "I have something to tell you all," Margaret said during a brief lull in conversation. No one looked up. "I said I have something important." "Mom, can you pass the potatoes?" Jason interrupted, not even glancing her way. Margaret passed the dish, her announcement dying on her lips. Later, as she loaded the dishwasher alone, despite Rebecca's half-hearted offer to help, Margaret caught sight of her reflection in the kitchen window. Who was this faded woman with stooped shoulders? When had she become so invisible? She thought back to her college days when she'd been known for her photography talent. Her professor had called her work extraordinarily perceptive, predicting she'd go far. But then she'd met Thomas, fallen in love, and gradually her camera had gathered dust as babies and PTA meetings and Thomas's career took precedence. 2 days later, the family gathered for Alex's 10th birthday party. Margaret had spent the entire day baking his favorite chocolate cake, decorating the house with superhero-themed banners and wrapping presents. By afternoon, her chest was tight, pain radiating down her left arm, but she pushed through, determined not to ruin the celebration. As Alex blew out his candles, Margaret felt the room spin. Cake knife slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. She reached for the table to steady herself, but her legs gave way, and darkness crowded the edges of her vision. Margaret! Thomas's alarmed voice seemed to come from far away. She woke in the hospital, the steady beep of monitors surrounding her. Thomas sat beside her bed, looking shaken. "You gave us quite a scare," he said, patting her hand awkwardly. "Doctor says you've been pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest more." "Did they tell you about my heart?" Margaret asked weakly. Thomas frowned. "What about your heart?" "The report on the coffee table, Thomas. I've needed heart surgery for weeks now." His face registered shock, then confusion, then something that looked almost like accusation. "Why didn't you say something?" Margaret turned her face away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. As she lay in her hospital bed, Margaret overheard her children in the hallway. "What are we supposed to do?" "I can't take that much time off work to care for her," Jason's voice carried through the partially open door. "Don't look at me," Rebecca replied. "I have the kids and that huge project deadline coming up. Maybe we could hire someone?" Jason suggested. "With what money? You know Dad's retirement doesn't stretch that far." "This is so inconvenient. Why now?" "Lily has her recital coming up, and I promised to take the kids to Disney next month." Margaret's heart, her failing, damaged heart, seemed to crack further at her daughter's words. Inconvenient. Her illness was inconvenient to them. When she was discharged the following day, neither Jason nor Rebecca could find the time to pick her up. Thomas came alone, looking uncomfortable and out of place in the hospital setting. "The kids send their love," he said unconvincingly. "They're just busy with work and the children." Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Stay with me as we discover how Margaret transforms from invisible caretaker to a woman reclaiming her worth. Subscribe to see what happens when her family realizes what they've taken for granted all these years. Back at home, things changed, but not in the way Margaret had hoped. Instead of support, she received grudging assistance tinged with resentment. Thomas learned to use the microwave but complained constantly about the quality of frozen meals. One evening, while Thomas was at his weekly poker game, Margaret opened her laptop to check her email. A notification popped up. Thomas had forgotten to log out of his account. She was about to close it when a name caught her eye: Elaine Montgomery, Thomas's former colleague. Against her better judgment, Margaret clicked on the email thread. What she found made her stomach drop. Dozens of exchanges, spanning months, filled with intimate conversations about feelings, regrets, and thinly veiled references to if things had been different. "Margaret has always been focused on the children and grandchildren," Thomas had written. "She never really understood my work or ambitions the way you do." Margaret sat frozen, the blue light of the screen illuminating her tear-streaked face. All these years, she'd believed Thomas had simply been distant because of his nature. Now she understood he'd been emotionally invested elsewhere. The next morning, Margaret made a decision. She packed a small suitcase with essential clothing, her heart medication, and her camera. She withdrew money from their joint savings account, money she'd contributed to throughout their marriage. She left a brief note on the kitchen counter. "I need some time. Don't try to find me." As she closed the front door behind her, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: freedom. The weight of expectations momentarily lifted from her shoulders, allowing her to stand straighter despite the pain in her chest. Margaret checked into a modest hotel on the outskirts of town, far enough away that she wouldn't run into anyone she knew. For 3 days, she barely left her room, sleeping more than she had in years and taking her medication on schedule for the first time since her diagnosis. On the 4th day, she ventured out with her camera, capturing the morning light as it fell across an abandoned factory. Her phone buzzed constantly. She ignored most of the calls but eventually answered when Rebecca's name appeared for the 10th time. "Mom, where are you?" "We're worried sick." Her daughter's voice was shrill with what sounded more like irritation than concern. "I'm fine, Rebecca. I just needed some time away." "Away? You can't just leave." Dad doesn't know how to work the washing machine, and I need someone to watch Lily after school tomorrow. My sitter canceled. Margaret closed her eyes. I'm sorry, but you'll have to figure something out. I won't be home for a while. What does that mean? How long is a while? Mom, you're being completely selfish right now. Do you even realize what you're putting us through? The accusation stung, but something inside Margaret had hardened. Selfish? I've given all of myself to this family for 45 years. I think I've earned a few days to myself. She ended the call before Rebecca could respond and turned off her phone. Later that afternoon, a sharp pain shot through Margaret's chest as she bent to adjust her camera tripod. She fumbled for her pills, hands shaking so badly she dropped the bottle. As she knelt to retrieve it, the pain intensified, leaving her gasping on the floor of her hotel room. She managed to reach the bedside phone and call the front desk. I need help, she whispered before consciousness slipped away. She woke to the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room, the now familiar beeping of machines tracking her fragile heartbeat. A nurse noticed her stirring and approached the bed. Welcome back, Mrs. Wilson. You gave us quite a scare. Is there someone we should call for you? Margaret started to shake her head, then hesitated. Actually, could you try this number? She recited a phone number she hadn't dialed in over 5 years. 4 hours later, a tall man with kind eyes and Thomas's jawline walked into her room. Michael Wilson, her stepson from Thomas's first marriage, whom she'd helped raise from age 10 but who had drifted away from the family years ago after a falling out with his father. Margaret? His voice was deep and warm, concern etched across his features. What's going on? The hospital said you had a cardiac event? Michael? You came. She hadn't expected him to, not really. Not after all this time. He pulled a chair close to her bed. Of course I came. You helped raise me. Now tell me what's happening, and why you're alone in a hospital 40 miles from home. Margaret found herself telling him everything. The heart condition, the ignored medical report, Thomas's emotional affair, her invisible existence, and her escape. Michael listened without interruption, his expression darkening with each revelation. When she finished, he reached for her hand. You're coming home with me, he said firmly. At least until you're stronger and can decide what you want to do. But your father doesn't need to know where you are until you're ready to tell him. Michael's tone left no room for argument. You need rest and care right now, not stress and guilt trips. Margaret nodded, tears threatening again, but this time from relief. Someone had seen her, really seen her, and was putting her needs first. Meanwhile, chaos had erupted at the Wilson household. Thomas, who had never cooked more than toast in his life, survived on takeout and frozen meals. The laundry piled up in corners. Bill notices went unopened. Dust gathered on surfaces Margaret had kept gleaming for decades. This is ridiculous, Jason complained on day 10 of Margaret's absence. We need to find Mom and bring her home. This little tantrum of hers has gone on long enough. I've called everyone she knows, Thomas said, looking more disheveled than his children had ever seen him. No one's heard from her. I even filed a police report, but they said since she left voluntarily and there's no evidence of danger, there's nothing they can do. Did something happen between you two? Rebecca asked, eyeing her father suspiciously. Thomas avoided her gaze. Nothing unusual. Your mother's been acting strange ever since her health scare. Well, we need to do something, Jason insisted. I have an important client dinner next week, and I was counting on Mom to watch the kids. Plus, Lily's recital costume needs alterations, and none of us can sew. Rebecca nodded in agreement. Mom needs to understand she can't just walk away from her responsibilities. We all depend on her. Neither of them noticed how their words revealed exactly why Margaret had left. In Michael's comfortable suburban home 40 miles away, Margaret was slowly regaining her strength. His house was filled with beautiful photographs, many of remote landscapes and architectural studies that reminded her of her own early work. "You have a good eye," she commented one morning over breakfast. "These are remarkable." Michael smiled. "I got that from watching you when I was a kid. Remember how you used to take me along on your photo walks before Jason was born? I'd hold your extra lenses and you'd explain about light and composition." Margaret was startled. "You remember that? You couldn't have been more than 12. "Those are some of my favorite memories," Michael said softly. "You treated photography like a sacred art. I saw how alive you were behind the camera, how your whole presence changed. Your dad made you put it away to focus on the family, something dimmed in you." His words hit her like a revelation. Someone had noticed. All these years she'd thought no one had seen her slow disappearance, but Michael had. "Why did we lose touch, Michael?" she asked, though she knew the answer. He sighed. "Dad didn't approve of my career choice. He wanted me in business like him, not wasting time with creative pursuits, as he put it. When I refused to give up photography, he cut me off. You tried to play peacemaker, but he made it clear I wasn't welcome. Eventually, it was easier to stay away. I should have tried harder to keep you in our lives," Margaret said regretfully. Michael shook his head. "You were in an impossible position. Dad made sure of that." Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret's health improved steadily under Michael's attentive care. Her color returned, and the chest pains subsided with proper medication and reduced stress. She began accompanying Michael on short photo excursions, borrowing one of his digital cameras since she'd only brought her old film camera. During one of these outings, Michael suggested something that made Margaret's heart beat faster for reasons unrelated to her condition. "There's a small gallery downtown that showcases local photographers. The owner, Eleanor, is a friend of mine. I showed her some of your work from the old albums at Dad's house that I digitized years ago. She wants to meet you." Margaret froze. "My old work? You kept that?" Michael nodded. "I thought someone should preserve it. Your street photography series from the 70s was groundbreaking, Margaret." Eleanor nearly fell out of her chair when she saw it. "She wants to talk to you about a small exhibition." For the first time in decades, Margaret felt a flicker of professional pride. "Do you really think people would be interested in my old photos?" "Those and whatever new work you want to create," Michael said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It's never too late to reclaim your art, Margaret." That evening, Margaret's phone rang. It was Thomas. After 3 weeks of silence, she finally answered. "Where are you?" His voice was a mixture of anger and desperation. "This little disappearing act needs to end now, Margaret. The house is a mess, the grandkids keep asking for you, and I can't find any of my medication. It's in the bathroom cabinet, top shelf, labeled with your name, just like it's been for 20 years, Margaret replied calmly. "That's not the point. You can't just abandon your family like this. It's irresponsible and selfish." Margaret took a deep breath. "I'm with Michael." There was a long silence on the other end. "Michael? My son Michael?" "Yes, Thomas. Your son. The one you haven't spoken to in 5 years. Why would you go to him instead of coming home to your actual family?" The betrayal in his voice was rich with irony considering his emotional infidelity. "Because when I collapsed, he was the only person I could think of who might care about me rather than what I could do for him." "That's not fair, Margaret." "Isn't it?" Her voice was steady now. "Tell me honestly, Thomas. If you hadn't found those emails between you and Elaine, would you have even noticed I was unhappy?" Another long silence. "I'm having heart surgery next month," Margaret continued. "Michael is helping me arrange it. Afterward, we'll talk about what happens next." "Surgery? But..." "Goodbye, Thomas. I'll be in touch." As she ended the call, Margaret realized something profound had shifted inside her. For the first time in her adult life, she had prioritized her own well-being over everyone else's comfort. The guilt she'd expected to feel was strangely absent, replaced by a quiet resolve. She was no longer invisible, not to herself and not to Michael. And soon, if Eleanor's interest in her photography panned out, perhaps not to the world either. Eleanor Barnes's gallery was smaller than Margaret had imagined, but the space was beautifully designed, with clean white walls and perfect lighting that made each photograph shine. The gallery owner, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a stylish gray bob, studied Margaret with undisguised curiosity. "So, you're the mysterious Margaret Wilson. Michael has told me so much about you." Eleanor gestured to a table where Michael had arranged a selection of Margaret's early work, printed and matted by a professional lab. "These are extraordinary. The perspective, the composition. You captured moments of raw humanity when most photographers were still obsessed with perfect technique." Margaret felt her cheeks flush with pleasure and embarrassment. "It was just a hobby, really." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "This wasn't a hobby. This was art." "Why did you stop?" Question hung in the air. Margaret glanced at Michael, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Life happened," she finally said. "Marriage, children, responsibilities. My husband didn't see the point of it once we started a family." Eleanor made a dismissive noise. "Men often don't see the point of things that don't directly serve them." She picked up one of the prints, a young mother gazing out a bus window, her sleeping child against her shoulder, exhaustion and love mingled on her face. "This speaks to me. It would speak to others too." "Eleanor wants to feature your work in the gallery's upcoming exhibition," Michael explained. "A retrospective of your early pieces, plus any new work you create over the next few months." Margaret's heart raced, and not due to her condition. "I don't know. It's been so long." "The exhibition is called Second Acts," Eleanor interrupted. "It features artists who found or reclaimed their voice later in life. I think you'd be perfect for it." The idea terrified and thrilled Margaret in equal measure. "I'd need a camera. My old equipment." "Already taken care of," Michael said, handing her a wrapped package. Inside was a professional-grade digital camera, similar to the one she'd been borrowing from him but brand new. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept this, it's too expensive." "Consider it 45 years of missed birthday presents," Michael said gently. "Besides, I got a great deal through my industry contacts." By the time they left the gallery, Margaret had agreed to the exhibition. Eleanor wanted at least 30 pieces, 15 from her early work and 15 new photographs exploring her current perspective. "She really believes in me," Margaret said wonderingly as Michael drove them home. "Because she sees what I've always seen," he replied. "Your gift doesn't just disappear because it was ignored, Margaret." For the next week, Margaret threw herself into photography with a passion that surprised even her. The new camera felt strange at first, all digital menus and settings where her old camera had dials and mechanical simplicity, but the principles remained the same. Light, composition, moment, these were her tools as they had always been. She captured the changing neighborhoods, the contrast between old and new buildings, the faces of people going about their daily lives unaware they were being immortalized. And throughout it all, she found herself again, the woman who had once had ambitions beyond keeping a perfect home. Meanwhile, the situation at the Wilson household had gone from bad to worse. Thomas was sleeping poorly, his own health declining without Margaret's careful attention to his diet and medication schedule. Jason and Rebecca were fighting over who had to handle various family responsibilities, both resenting the extra demands on their time. "This is ridiculous," Rebecca snapped after finding Thomas eating cold pizza for breakfast for the third day in a row. "We need to bring Mom home." "Did she say anything about where she's staying with Michael?" "No," Thomas admitted, looking more haggard than ever. "She just said she's having heart surgery next month." "Heart surgery?" Jason looked up sharply. "Is it serious?" "I don't know. She didn't tell me the details." Thomas's voice was bitter. "Apparently, she doesn't think her actual husband needs to know such things." Don't you think that's strange, Dad? Rebecca asked, studying her father. Mom's always told us everything about her health. Why would she hide something this important? Before Thomas could respond, Rebecca's phone chimed with a text. She glanced at it, then did a double take, her eyes widening. Oh my God, she whispered, staring at the screen. What is it? Jason leaned over to see. Rebecca held up her phone to show a social media post from a local arts magazine. Upcoming exhibition at Eleanor Barnes Gallery to feature long-lost photography of Margaret Wilson. Below the headline was one of Margaret's photographs from the 1970s, a striking black and white image of an elderly couple dancing in a nearly empty ballroom. Mom was a photographer? Jason asked, confused. Thomas looked away, guilt written across his face. You knew about this? Rebecca demanded, suddenly seeing her father in a new light. Thomas sighed heavily. She used to be quite good. Had some recognition in college. But we agreed when we started our family that she would focus on being a homemaker. Her hobby wasn't practical for raising children. Her hobby, Rebecca repeated, scrolling through the article. Dad, this says she was offered a scholarship to study at the New York Institute of Photography but turned it down. That was her choice, Thomas said defensively. No one forced her. But his eyes said something different, something that made his children look at each other with dawning realization. We need to go see her, Jason said finally. All of us. The following day, Thomas, Jason, and Rebecca pulled up outside Michael's house. They'd had to do some detective work to find the address, eventually getting it from an old family friend who had kept in touch with Michael over the years. This is a nice place, Rebecca commented, looking at the well-kept craftsman-style home with its neat garden. I always wondered what happened to Michael after you two fell out. Thomas ignored the implied criticism and marched up to the front door, knocking forcefully. Michael opened it, his expression hardening when he saw his father. Dad, this is unexpected. Where's Margaret? Thomas demanded, trying to look past him into the house. She's not here right now, Michael replied coolly. She's at a follow-up appointment with her cardiologist. Cardiologist? Jason stepped forward. How serious is this heart condition? Michael studied his half-siblings for a moment. Serious enough that she collapsed alone in a hotel room 3 weeks ago. Serious enough that she needs valve replacement surgery. Serious enough that she's been living with it for months while all of you ignored the symptoms. His words landed like blows. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. We didn't know, she whispered. The report was on the coffee table for days, Michael said, his voice cold. But no one bothered to ask about it, did they? Too busy with their own lives to notice she was dying right in front of you. That's enough, Thomas said sharply. You have no right to judge us. Don't I? Michael crossed his arms. I've spent the last 3 weeks watching Margaret slowly come back to life, not just physically but spiritually. Do you have any idea what it did to her to suppress her talent all these years? To be nothing more than a support system for everyone else. We didn't force her into that role, Jason protested. Didn't you? Michael countered. When was the last time any of you asked about her dreams? Her needs? When was the last time you saw her as a person instead of a function? The uncomfortable silence that followed gave him his answer. Michael? Who's at the door? Margaret's voice came from behind him as she appeared in the hallway, returning from her appointment. She froze when she saw her family. Margaret? Thomas stepped forward, relief and accusation battling in his voice. Thank God. We've been worried sick. Have you? Margaret asked quietly. Of course we have. Rebecca rushed forward, reaching for her mother's hands. Why didn't you tell us about your heart? About the surgery you need? I tried, Margaret said simply. Many times. No one was listening. Her words silenced them all. For perhaps the first time they really looked at her, not the mother, wife, and grandmother who existed to serve their needs, but the woman standing before them. She looked different somehow, stronger, more present, her eyes clearer than they'd seen in years. "Can we come in?" Thomas finally asked. "We need to talk." Michael glanced at Margaret, making it clear the decision was hers. "Yes," she said after a moment. "We should talk." The family gathered awkwardly in Michael's living room. On the walls hung several of Margaret's new photographs, beautifully framed, street scenes capturing poignant human moments, architectural studies of forgotten buildings, and portraits that seemed to reveal the subjects' inner lives. "These are yours?" Jason asked, gesturing to the photographs. Margaret nodded. "I've been working on a new collection for an exhibition." "They're amazing, Mom," Rebecca said, studying a particularly striking image of an elderly woman feeding pigeons, her weathered face illuminated by a shaft of sunlight. "I had no idea you could do this." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Margaret replied without bitterness, just stating a fact. Thomas cleared his throat. "Margaret, it's time to come home. Whatever point you were trying to make, we understand now. We'll do better." Margaret looked at him steadily. "This isn't about making a point, Thomas. This is about me finally taking care of myself after a lifetime of taking care of everyone else." "But we need you," he insisted. "And that's exactly the problem," she said softly. "You need what I provide, not me. Not the person I am or could be." As the painful conversation continued, Margaret realized something important was happening. For the first time, her family was seeing her, really seeing her. It wasn't necessarily a comfortable experience for any of them, but it was real in a way their interactions hadn't been for decades. Whether this would lead to reconciliation or a permanent separation remained to be seen. But Margaret knew one thing with certainty: she would never again allow herself to become invisible. The day of Margaret's surgery arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. The specialized valve replacement procedure would be performed at a cardiac center an hour away, requiring her to stay in the hospital for at least 5 days afterward. In the pre-op room, Margaret was surprised to find not just Michael waiting with her, but Thomas, Jason, and Rebecca as well. Their presence created a strange tension, part concern, part lingering resentment, part tentative reconciliation. "The doctor says it's a routine procedure," Thomas said, clearly trying to sound reassuring while fidgeting with his watch. "Low risk." "With a 90% success rate," Rebecca added, looking up from her phone where she'd been researching the surgery. "And you're otherwise healthy, so your odds are even better." Margaret nodded, touched by their efforts despite everything. "Thank you for being here." When the nurses came to wheel her into surgery, Michael squeezed her hand. "We'll all be waiting when you wake up." The surgery lasted 6 hours. In the waiting room, old wounds and new realizations created an uncomfortable but necessary conversation among the family members. "I still don't understand why she never told us about her photography," Jason said, pacing back and forth. "Or her heart condition." "She did try to tell us," Rebecca admitted. "Remember that dinner a few weeks before she left? She kept trying to say something important and we all just talked over her." "It wasn't just that one time," Michael added quietly. Margaret tried to maintain her identity as a photographer for years after marrying Dad. But every time she picked up her camera, there was always something more important she should be doing instead. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That was a different time. We needed her at home." "Did you?" Michael challenged. "Or did you just not want to share the spotlight? Margaret told me how you reacted when a local magazine wanted to feature her work after Jason was born. How you said it would be embarrassing to have your wife pursuing such an impractical passion." "That's not how it was," Thomas protested, but his eyes betrayed him. "You know what I remember?" Rebecca interjected. "When I was about 12, I found a box of Mom's old photographs in the attic. They were amazing, nothing like the simple family snapshots she took of us. When I asked her about them, she got this sad look on her face and said they were from another life." I didn't understand what that meant until now. Jason stopped pacing. I remember when Lily was born, Mom brought her old camera to the hospital. She was so excited to take artistic portraits of her first grandchild. But I told her to put it away because the clicking noise was annoying me. They fell silent, each confronting their own role in Margaret's disappearance from herself. We all failed her, Thomas finally said, his voice thick. Not just as a photographer, but as a person. I was the worst offender. I knew what she gave up to be with me, but I convinced myself it was a fair trade, my success for her support. She never complained, Rebecca said weakly. That doesn't make it right, Michael replied. The surgeon appeared in the doorway then, still in scrubs. They all stood, tension mounting. Mrs. Wilson came through the procedure very well, the doctor announced, bringing collective sighs of relief. The valve replacement was successful, and barring any complications, she should make a full recovery. She'll need to take it easy for a few months, but there's no reason she can't return to normal activities eventually. When can we see her? Thomas asked. She's in recovery now. Once she's moved to the ICU, you can visit briefly, one at a time. When Margaret was finally settled in the ICU, Michael went in first. He returned 20 minutes later, giving Thomas a stiff nod. She wants to see you next. Thomas entered the room hesitantly. Margaret looked small among the machines and tubes, but her eyes were clear as they fixed on him. You look terrible, she said, her voice hoarse but with a hint of humor. Thomas laughed despite himself. You should see the other guy. He sat in the chair beside her bed, unsure where to begin. Margaret, I saw the emails, she interrupted. Between you and Elaine. Thomas dropped his gaze. It wasn't what you think. Nothing physical ever happened. In some ways, that makes it worse, Margaret said softly. You gave her the connection, the understanding, the appreciation you should have given me. I know, he admitted. I've been selfish, Margaret. Not just with Elaine, but for our entire marriage. I took and never stopped to think about what you needed. Why now, Thomas? Why the sudden realization after 45 years? He gestured helplessly. Because you left. 'Cause I saw your photographs again and remembered the woman I fell in love with. Passionate, talented, with a way of seeing the world I never could. And I realized I'd spent decades dimming that light because it made me feel inadequate. Margaret considered his words. I can't go back to how things were. I'm not asking you to, Thomas said quickly. I just want a chance to know the real you again. The woman I've been living with but not seeing. For Thomas, Jason and Rebecca took their turns visiting. Their conversations were tearful, filled with apologies and promises to do better. Margaret accepted their words with grace but made no commitments about the future. 4 days later, Margaret was released from the hospital. Question of where she would go hung in the air. I want you to come home, Thomas said as they stood in the hospital corridor. Not as my housekeeper or the children's support system, but as my wife. As Margaret the photographer. I'll help with your recovery, I promise. We've arranged for a home health aide, Jason added. Someone to help with the things you shouldn't be doing while you recover. Margaret looked at Michael, who had been her rock through everything. What do you think? It's your decision, he said gently. But whatever you choose, I'll still be part of your life. That won't change. And your exhibition opens in 3 weeks, Rebecca reminded her. Eleanor called yesterday to check on you. She said everything's on track. Your work has been framed and the gallery space is being prepared. Margaret felt an unexpected surge of pride. Her exhibition. Her work. Her identity reclaimed after all these years. I'll come home, she decided. At least during my recovery. But things will be different. And they were. Thomas converted his home office into a photography studio for her, installing proper lighting and a digital workspace. Jason and Rebecca called before visiting, asking if it was a good time rather than assuming her availability. The grandchildren were taught to respect her work hours, and for the first time they began to see their grandmother as more than just the woman who baked cookies and helped with homework. 3 weeks later, on the opening night of her exhibition, Margaret stood in Eleanor's gallery surrounded by her photographs, her vision, her perspective on the world made visible for all to see. She wore a simple black dress and comfortable shoes, a concession to her still healing body, but she'd never felt more beautiful. "Nervous?" Michael asked, appearing at her side with a glass of sparkling water. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if no one comes?" He smiled. "Turn around." Margaret did, and her breath caught. The gallery was filling with people, not just her family but critics, other photographers, art lovers drawn by the promotional materials Eleanor had distributed throughout the city. "Oh my," she whispered. As the evening progressed, Margaret found herself the center of attention, a novel experience after decades of blending into the background. People wanted to discuss her techniques, her inspirations, her unique perspective. A local arts reporter interviewed her about her remarkable late career emergence. "I wouldn't call it late," Margaret told him with a smile. "I'd call it right on time." The most surprising moment came when a well-dressed woman in her 60s approached, examining one of Margaret's early photographs with particular intensity. "This is extraordinary work," the woman said. "The composition, the emotional impact. Have you considered teaching?" Margaret laughed. "I'm a bit old to start a teaching career, don't you think?" "Nonsense. I'm the head of the photography department at the community college. We're always looking for instructors with real-world experience and artistic vision. Our students would benefit enormously from your perspective." She handed Margaret a business card. "Think about it. We offer evening workshops that would work around your recovery schedule." As the woman walked away, Thomas appeared at Margaret's side. "Who was that?" "Someone offering me a teaching position," Margaret replied, still somewhat stunned. "Are you going to take it?" She studied his face, looking for the disapproval or dismissal she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, she found genuine curiosity. "I'm considering it," she said cautiously. Thomas nodded. "You'd be good at it. You always had a way of explaining things that made them clear." Their eyes met, decades of history between them, some painful, some beautiful. Margaret realized that while she might never fully forgive the years of invisibility, there was still something worth salvaging in their relationship. Not the old dynamic, but something new, built on mutual respect rather than expectation. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said softly. "It means a lot." Thomas took her hand tentatively. "I wouldn't have missed it." "I'm proud of you, Margaret." Those 4 simple words, words she'd said to him countless times throughout their marriage but had rarely heard in return, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Across the room, Jason and Rebecca were examining her photographs with newfound appreciation, occasionally glancing over at their mother with expressions of pride and lingering regret. Michael stood with Eleanor, both of them beaming at the success of the exhibition. And in the center of it all was Margaret, no longer invisible, no longer merely a function in others' lives, but a woman fully seen at last. 6 months after her exhibition opening, Margaret sat in the sunlit classroom of the community college, watching her students pack up their camera equipment. She'd accepted the teaching position, starting with 1 evening workshop per week. Class had quickly become the most popular in the photography department. "Remember your assignments," she called as they filed out. "I want to see how you interpret invisible moments in everyday life. Look for what others walk past without noticing." As the last student left, Margaret began gathering her own materials. Her strength had returned fully after the surgery, and though she still took medication for her heart, her doctors were pleased with her recovery. "Professor Wilson?" A hesitant voice came from the doorway. Margaret looked up to see a young woman in her 20s, clutching a portfolio. "My office hours are tomorrow afternoon," she began. "I'm not one of your students," the woman explained. "My name is Emily." I'm a reporter with the National Arts Review. We've been following your story since your exhibition 6 months ago, and I was hoping to interview you for our second acts feature. Margaret felt a flutter of surprise. National Arts Review? That's quite a prestigious publication. Emily nodded enthusiastically. Your work has generated significant interest in the art world. The way you captured ordinary moments and made them extraordinary speaks to people. And frankly, your personal journey from housewife to acclaimed photographer at 66 is inspiring, especially to women who feel they've lost themselves to family obligations. Margaret considered the request. I'd need to check my schedule. Of course. Emily handed her a business card. We'd like to do a proper photo spread as well, featuring both your work and you in your creative environment. The article would focus on how it's never too late to reclaim your passion. After Emily left, Margaret sat in the empty classroom, turning the business card over in her fingers. National Arts Review. Her work, her story, reaching people across the country. Thought was both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, she shared the news with her family over dinner. These family dinners had become a weekly tradition, but with a significant difference. They were now held at Michael's house, with everyone contributing to the meal preparation. No one simply expected Margaret to handle everything. That's incredible, Mom, Rebecca said, genuine pride in her voice. You deserve the recognition. Will they pay you for the interview? Jason asked, earning an elbow from his sister. What? It's a fair question. Mom's work has value. She should be compensated. They mentioned an honorarium, Margaret replied with a smile. Jason had become surprisingly protective of her professional interests over the past months. You should do it, Michael encouraged. Your story might help other women find their voice later in life. Thomas, who had been quietly eating his pasta, finally spoke. I'm proud of you, Margaret. Though I admit, it's strange to think of our personal history being published in a national magazine. There was a subtle tension in his words. Margaret knew he was concerned about how he would be portrayed, as the husband who suppressed his wife's talent for decades. I wouldn't agree to anything that deliberately humiliated you or the children, she assured him. But I won't hide the truth either. Our story is complicated, with plenty of blame to go around, including my own failure to stand up for myself. Thomas nodded, accepting her terms. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined a year earlier, a partnership of equals, built on hard-earned respect rather than traditional expectations. They were still living together, sharing a home but with clearly defined boundaries and personal space. The following week, Margaret met with Emily for the interview. They sat in her studio, surrounded by her photographs and works in progress. When did you first realize you had become invisible in your own life? Emily asked, recorder running. Margaret considered the question carefully. I don't think there was a single moment. It happened gradually, like water slowly eroding stone. A hobby set aside here, an opinion dismissed there, until eventually I became a function rather than a person, the reliable background that enabled everyone else's lives to run smoothly. And what changed? What was the catalyst that made you decide to reclaim your identity? Margaret touched her chest unconsciously, feeling the scar beneath her blouse. My heart literally began to fail. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I realized I could either die as the person everyone needed me to be, or live as the person I was meant to be. The interview continued for hours, covering her early photography career, the years of invisibility, her escape, reconciliation, and artistic rebirth. Margaret spoke with a candor that surprised even herself, finding unexpected healing in articulating her journey. 3 weeks later, the magazine hit newsstands with Margaret's story as the cover feature. The article was titled The Invisible Canvas: How Margaret Wilson Reclaimed Her Voice at 66. Alongside stunning reproductions of her photographs were portraits of Margaret herself, in her studio, teaching her class and standing between Michael and Thomas, all three looking directly into the camera with clear eyes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails flooded in from women across the country sharing similar stories of lost identities and buried dreams. A prestigious gallery in New York contacted Eleanor about bringing Margaret's exhibition to a wider audience. The community college asked if she would consider developing a full curriculum around her approach to photography. But the most unexpected consequence came on a Tuesday afternoon when Margaret returned home from teaching to find a sleek black car parked in the driveway. A young woman in an expensive suit stood on the porch, consulting her phone. "Mrs. Wilson," she called as Margaret approached. "I'm Vanessa Chen, executive producer at Landmark Films. We're interested in acquiring the rights to your story for a feature film." Margaret nearly dropped her camera bag. "A film? About me?" "Your journey resonates with millions of women who've subordinated their identities to family obligations. Several major actresses have already expressed interest in the role." That evening, Margaret's family gathered for an emergency meeting to discuss this unexpected development. "A movie?" Jason repeated, still processing the news. "About us." "About Mom specifically," Rebecca corrected him. "Though we'd all be characters in it." "They're offering a substantial sum," Margaret said, still somewhat dazed by the whole thing. "More money than I ever imagined having at this stage of life." "Be careful," Michael advised. "These contracts can be complicated. You'll want a good entertainment lawyer to review everything." Thomas had been uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I just want to know one thing, Margaret. In this movie, will I be the villain of the story?" The room fell silent. It was the question that had hovered unspoken since the magazine article was published. Thomas had read it, acknowledged its truth, but they had never directly discussed how it portrayed him. Margaret met his gaze steadily. "If they tell the story honestly, you won't be a villain or a hero. You'll be what you were, a man of your generation with certain expectations about marriage, who slowly lost sight of the woman he married. And I'll be what I was, a woman who allowed her own light to be dimmed because it seemed easier than fighting for it." Thomas nodded slowly. "I can live with that truth." 2 days later, as news of the potential film adaptation spread, Jason called Margaret in a panic. "Mom, have you seen this?" His voice was tight with concern. "Seen what?" "Turn on Channel 7. Now." Margaret switched on the television to find a local news program running a segment about her. The banner headline read, "From Housewife to Hollywood, Local Grandmother's Journey to Fame." But what made her stomach drop was the sight of her daughter-in-law Leona, Jason's wife, speaking to a reporter outside their home. "Of course we're all very proud of Margaret," Leona was saying with a practiced smile. "But it's been hard on the family, especially the grandchildren. One day she was their devoted grandmother, the next she was just gone. No warning, no explanation. The children were devastated." Camera cut to the reporter. Sources close to the family suggest that Margaret Wilson abandoned her husband and children at a time when they needed her most, leaving them to fend for themselves while she pursued fame. Margaret muted the television, her hands shaking. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Jason said desperately. "Leona did this behind my back. I had no idea she was talking to reporters." "It's all right," Margaret said, though it wasn't. "She's entitled to her perspective." But the damage was done. By evening, social media was ablaze with debates about Margaret's story. While many defended her right to selfhood, others accused her of selfishly abandoning her family responsibilities. The narrative was shifting from inspiration to controversy. The next morning, a different kind of message arrived. An email from a woman named Cynthia Barrett, founder of the Second Chapter Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping women rediscover and pursue dreams deferred by family obligations. "Your story has touched thousands of women in similar situations," the email read. "Would you consider being our keynote speaker at our annual conference next month? Your voice is needed now more than ever." As Margaret considered the invitation, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Rebecca standing there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I saw the news segment," Rebecca said. Leona had no right to speak for us like that. She was protecting her family, Margaret replied. I understand that instinct. No, Mom. She was protecting her comfort. Truth is, we got exactly what we deserved when you left. We've been taking you for granted for years, expecting unlimited support with no thought to what it cost you. Rebecca took a deep breath. That's why I came. I want to go on record, on camera, with my own perspective. I want to tell the truth about how we treated you and why your leaving was the wake-up call we all needed. Margaret felt a surge of emotion. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do, Rebecca insisted. Not just for you, but for Lily. I don't want my daughter growing up thinking a woman's value lies solely in what she gives to others. I want her to see her grandmother standing in her power, and her mother supporting that truth. That afternoon, Rebecca gave an interview to the same news station, directly contradicting Leona's narrative. Jason called to say he was filing for divorce, finally acknowledging the toxicity that had been present in his marriage for years. Standing in the middle of this whirlwind of change, Margaret made her decision. She would speak at the conference, accept the film option, and continue teaching. But most importantly, she would keep taking photographs, capturing moments of truth in a world that often preferred comfortable lies. 1 month later, Margaret stood at a podium before 1,000 women at the second chapter conference. Her family, Thomas, Michael, Jason, Rebecca, and her grandchildren, sat in the front row. Even Eleanor was there, beaming with pride. For decades, I was the invisible canvas upon which my family painted their needs, Margaret began. I existed to make their lives possible, to absorb their worries, to smooth their paths. And somewhere along the way, I forgot something essential, that I was also meant to be the artist of my own life. She gestured to the large screen behind her, where one of her photographs appeared, a self-portrait taken in her studio, her face half in shadow, half in light. It's never too late to step out of the shadows. It's never too late to reclaim the dreams you set aside. It's never too late to become visible, to yourself first and then to the world. As applause filled the auditorium, Margaret looked at her family in the front row. Thomas nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and pride. Michael gave her a thumbs up. Rebecca wiped away tears while Jason looked on with newfound respect. They were all seeing her now, really seeing her. And more importantly, she was finally seeing herself. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.